This is one of the most important stories in Toronto real estate we've seen in a really long time. This new rule is going to change Toronto real estate forever. And since it's so important, of course, I made a video explaining the rules, where the city is coming from, who it's going to help, and who is not going to like it. If you have not guessed the topic of this video by the title, essentially Toronto is now allowing 4 or possibly 5 residential units on one residential lot. Before we get into this new rule and an article from the Toronto Star, let me know what you think of densification in the comments. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Let's get some sort of debate going on here. My name is Macallum and I lead a real estate team here in the city of Toronto, and we specialize in residential resale and pre-construction. If you're looking to learn more about this topic or anything else real estate related, you can go to the first link in the description of this video and book a meeting directly into my calendar at a time that works best for you. And if you could take a second to click like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. I'm trying to grow a community of like-minded people who want to stay up to date and learn about all things Toronto real estate. And my goal is to continuously provide you with value. Now, without further ado, let's get into this topic and the article from the Toronto Star. Toronto Council says multiplexes can be built citywide, and neighborhoods will no longer be preserved for single-family homes as new rules allow for up to 4 units on a single lot, or 5 if it's large enough for a laneway or garden suite. Toronto councillors on Wednesday afternoon voted to heed the recommendations of Chief Planner Greg Lintern and allow multiplex housing citywide, meaning duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes can be built without special permissions in neighborhoods from Rosedale to Westmount that are currently dominated by detached and semi-detached housing. What this essentially means is that properties like these shown here can now exist on residential lots which were previously only zoned for single-family housing, and no special permission is needed to create these types of properties. There are now 6 different configurations which can be built on residential lots. And the article goes on to state that the decision is an upheaval of Toronto's long-standing Yellowbelt, the roughly 70% of Toronto's zoned residential land that has been restricted to single-family homes only. Now, an upheaval is almost an understatement in my opinion. This policy revision has the impact to change our entire city, not just from a housing standpoint. Now, you may be wondering what the Yellow Belt is, and that's a valid question. You've heard of the Green Belt, but this is quite a bit different. So this is the Yellow Belt, which makes up the city of Toronto. And as you recall, it makes up about 70% of the city's zoned residential land. With 70% of the residential land zoned for low density, you can see how increasing the density from 1 to possibly 5 units could impact the city. Now, we need more housing units to accommodate for our growing population from immigration. In fact, we need more housing units even without immigration. And what I think is going to be interesting to see over the next decade or so is how the city officials provide adequate transit and other infrastructure in these areas. The article goes on to state that some elected officials argue the overhauls were a step too far, could inflate land prices if builders saw an opportunity to buy and demolish single houses to build multiplexes, or would upset residents of suburban areas. I mean, if there's an opportunity to make money, we can be sure that someone is going to take it. So there will be developers and builders who use this policy to make money. It's just a fact. But they are going to be adding supply to the marketplace, which we desperately need. This here is what sparks the debate between those pro-densification and those against it. Now, could this change inflate land prices like the article mentions? Sure, but the policy is providing housing, which we desperately need. And I think single-family lots will become increasingly valuable in specific neighborhoods. I also think that this change provides small developers and builders with an opportunity to help with our housing shortage. The small developer buys the land and turns one home into 5. And instead of one family occupying a 50 by 100-foot lot, you now have 5 families on that same size lot. And the thing we need to consider is that this is not a cheap investment for a small developer or builder to take on in order to provide more housing. The land and or the home on that lot may be worth 1.5, for example, which they need to purchase and then spend another 1.5, let's say, either building or renovating. They then become the landlord for the property, or they sell it to someone else for more than they paid, assuming the market has appreciated, which of course is no guarantee. And with such a major change in Toronto housing, you might think policymakers would take some time to see how everything nets out. But no. City staff are also expected to advance further policy changes in the coming years to boost density, starting with a final recommendation on allowing 4 to 6-story walk-up apartments on major streets in residential areas, which staff expect to release later in 2023. Now, I think this paragraph about housing affordability is quite interesting because the goal is to create more housing which is affordable. But we have to put aside housing affordability from a purchase standpoint, because right now, this is all about rental properties. Now, rental properties are more expensive closer to downtown, easy transit lines like Bloor and Yonge, and amenities. Planners have expressed hope of opening up more neighborhoods to those who cannot afford a single-family home. The question of affordability still looms, however. Cheryl Case, Executive Director of CP Planning and a member of a city roundtable on expanding housing, warned last month that without dedicated policies to create affordable units, the multiplex rules were unlikely to increase housing supply for the city's lower or even moderate income households. If we don't see enough multiplex development happening outside of central Toronto, where prices are already high on the rent side of the equation, then the multiplex rules may not provide enough housing supply to lower income households, just like the article says. And the article ends off by saying it's actually increasing the supply, the choice, the opportunity for housing. That's what it's all about. Okay, so now my thoughts on this topic, although I have sprinkled them in throughout this video. Let's start this quick segment off by saying I am all for densification so that those who want to live in our great city can. They don't need to drive till they qualify, as the saying goes. What needs to happen, however, is with increased densification, there needs to be better infrastructure, specifically transit, in order to get those living in the neighborhoods from point A to B efficiently and safely. When we add increased densification and increased population to a specific neighborhood, we need to have the infrastructure in order to support the increased population. But what I see moving forward is the importance of who your neighbors are if you own or are buying real estate and you don't want multiplexes being developed right beside or right behind your home. Although those who don't want a multiplex beside them can't really do anything about it, knowing their neighbors share the same viewpoint could become important. The other thing we have to ask ourselves is, who is going to develop these multiplexes from the ground up or buy a home and convert it? Or who is going to convert their current home? We will absolutely see developers and investors purchase million-dollar lots and develop multiplexes, or buy an old bungalow, knock it down, and build a multiplex. And this will occur outside the central core of Toronto. Where we won't see this housing is in affluent neighborhoods, which coincidentally are where people want to live. We won't see a homeowner in Forest Hill or Rosedale, for example, turn their $10 million single-family home into a 4-suite lot. It just won't happen. And we won't see a developer buy a vacant lot in those neighborhoods to build a multiplex because the numbers just won't make sense. Now, what I think is really interesting is how this policy impacts and changes the thought process of home ownership, and more specifically, owning a multiplex. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but what if we get to a point in time where each unit in a 4-unit multiplex can be individually deeded like a condo or even a townhouse or a semi? That could be quite lucrative for those who developed multiplexes while land values are where they are today. Over the next few years, I'm curious to see how many multiplexes were developed and exactly where they were developed.